The government has been accused of providing landlords with an opportunity to significantly increase rents every 6 years by opposition parties. The coalition insists that renters now have greater protections, with the 2% annual rent hike cap soon to be introduced across the country, coupled with far more security for tenants.
The issue of rent control was always going to be front and centre today, given the diametrically opposing views which the government and opposition hold. Some things were clear before the debate got underway. Rent pressure zones will now apply to all tenancies, not just rental hotspots. That means the current 2% cap on rent increases will be retained for all existing tenancies. However, the cap will no longer apply for new build apartments. Large landlords leasing 4 or more properties will not be allowed no-fault evictions. Small landlords leasing 3 properties or less will have to offer tenants a minimum of 6-year tenancies. In the Dáil, the opposition claimed renters would not be protected but thrown under the bus.
So under your proposals, as one renter walks out the door, they will be replaced by another whose rent will have ballooned. Students will be amongst the first hit by your actions. Finding affordable rental accommodation has been a constant struggle for students and their families, but you are now ensuring that this will be even harder.
Sinn Féin, be it a rent ban, be it whatever the Deputy has said, would actually reduce supply. You have no ideas. You have no solutions. That's your problem. And the people saw that last time out. You don't have it because you don't accept there's any role for the market at all. And that is a fundamental problem in terms of your presentation on this issue.
Opposition parties said the government's 6-year security of tenure would actually lead to a free-for-all.
You're extending the RPZs, sure, but if you're hollowing out what is meant by an RPZ, if you're reducing protections for those within RPZs, then that doesn't have the desired effect.
Every 6 years, rent regulation as we know it is effectively gone, and landlords can up the rents fully every 6 years. So you have 2% increase, 2% increase, 2% increase, 2%, 2%, and then 40%, 30%, an unimaginable level that is simply not affordable.
The Taoiseach retorted that rent freezes as proposed by the opposition would mean private sector investment would disappear.
No one's going to invest in a market where essentially you invest knowing you're going to be losing money fairly quickly. So the package is about getting a balance to incentivise investment into the rental market whilst protecting existing tenants who will not see an increase in their rent. No matter how much you shout that, they will not have an increase in their rent above the 2%.
The rent reform is due to come into effect on March 1st next year. Just precisely what that means for landlords and renters isn't yet clear. Paul Cunningham, RT News.
The national housing charity Threshold has said it's hopeful the planned changes will provide long-term stability to renters. However, one property agent in the North West says the rules will create challenges for smaller landlords.
John Bohan is renting in Dublin's North Inner City. He's a member of the Community Action Tenants Union.
I think our key demand was met in the keeping and expansion of rent pressure zones, but what we need to see is a cutting of the rent and a sustainable pathway for that. And I worry about a big mad dash between this announcement and legislation coming in that landlords will try and get in ahead of it. The rents do need to come down.
The extension of rent pressure zones nationwide will impact rural counties.
Well, to cap rent for a start, it helped, because there were 500-600 to rent a house in Clooney when I was 18, and it's now up on 1,600-1,700.
I've been renting in Dublin the last 4 years for college, so anything to help out particularly young people would be great, because already after finishing college most of my friends are emigrating or planning to emigrate because it's just impossible to live.
It's great that they're tackling it, but it's not just that. They need more houses. I think my landlord, when I applied for the house, I was the first person to apply, and he had about 250 phone calls.
Renters we have spoken to on the streets of Sligo have given a cautious welcome to today's announcement. However, those representing small landlords feel the new rules may be challenging.
After today's proposals, all County Sligo and all the country is going to be included in the rent pressure zone. The main problem I see with the new proposals is that landlords will not be allowed raise the rent if they evict tenants. This is totally unfair to small landlords who already are renting well below market rents.
Threshold has said adequate resources should be provided to ensure adherence to the new proposals. Shane O'Curran, RTÉ News, Sligo.
Well, let's cross over to Leinster House now, where our political correspondent Micheál Lehane is standing by. Micheál, it's a fairly complex plan to tackle what's going on in the rental market. When will we know if it's working?
I think quite soon there will be some snapshots available, and that will centre really on those planning permissions that are there at the moment for apartment blocks. Will they be activated? Will essentially bricks be laid on mortar in the next few months or so and the work begin on those apartments? It will take several years before they are up and running and available for tenants, but I think that will be the first clue. I think there is potentially, though, a big short-term issue here, something that industry figures have been talking about this evening, and that is the fact that things do change quite significantly on the 1st of March next. That means that landlords will be able to set the market rate rents for new tenancies from that point on. But I suppose there are many of them that may have vacant properties at the moment or ones that are about to become vacant. Will they hold off on putting them on the rental market for those few months? If that does happen, that could make the housing crisis even worse in the short term. And I think it is that date of March 1st really that has raised most of the political temperature here throughout the day, because it is from that point on that tenants will get greater security, 6 years guaranteed security of tenure if they're with a small landlord, that is someone who owns 3 properties or less, and if they're with a bigger one, there is essentially a ban on no-fault evictions. But the trade-off for that does mean that every 6 years their landlord can bring in the course of a review, a resetting of their rent, and that could be quite substantial, many believe. Does that mean that those greater securities and that assurance of the 2% annual rent cap for most properties, does it in some way negate that? I think they are the kind of questions that tenants are asking this evening.
Political correspondent Micheál Lehane, thank you for that.
Returning now to the government's new plan for the rental sector, we're joined in studio by the Minister for Housing, James Browne. Good evening, Minister. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Little bit of confusion perhaps about the details of this. We heard the broad brushstrokes in our reports earlier, so let's just try and clear up some of those areas of confusion. You're expanding the rent pressure zone to the entire country, so that will bring in about a fifth of people, I think, who aren't covered by it at the moment. So rents will be controlled there, but throughout the country, any time a new tenant arrives and rents an apartment or a house, the landlord can increase the rent. So this is going to lead to higher rents, isn't it?
So currently, if you rent out a property for the first time, you can increase the rent, or should I say set it at market rent. I think the really important message here is for the 200,000 people who are tenants who are currently renting, nothing will change for them. So the current system that they have, where its rent can increase year on year by 2% or inflation, whichever is the lower, will be maintained. And the 6-year, if you like, resetting that we'll get to will not apply to them as long as they stay in their current tenancy. And secondly, really importantly, we are moving to a national rent control. And thirdly, this is now going to be a permanent rent control, because the existing position around rent pressure zones, it's been added to, it's been changed. It's a temporary measure that's now gone on for several years. So we want to put certainty and clarity there for renters. OK, but the Housing Agency report on which you based your decision said the existing system does not allow for a resetting of rents to market rates when a tenancy ends. The new system will. So that will lead to increased rents, won't it? So the new system will for new tenancies from the 1st of March in 2026. So 6 years after that, the landlord will be able to do a resetting, but you will be able to remain in. But each time a tenancy ends and a new tenant takes up a rent, the landlord can increase under your new system. So any new tenancy, you can reset the rent. And the Housing Agency on which you based it said standardised average rents would increase in the short term if you do what you're planning to do. Well, what we want to do is increase supply so that rents actually come down. No, I understand that, but just to clarify that, so according to the Housing Agency on which you're basing this report,
average rents will rise. Do you accept that?
But the housing agency is making that prediction. I think if we move quick enough, we can allay those fears in relation to that, because what we have is not only a large cohort of renters who are out there that we are protecting with this policy, but also a huge amount of renters who need to find somewhere to rent. And at the moment, we don't have the supply, we don't have the places for them to rent. It's a housing crisis. We need to make measures, and we're doing that. But in return, if you like, for that 6-year resetting for new tenancies, I'd have to emphasise existing tenants don't have to worry about that.
If they stay in their
existing tenancies. But that 6 years, you will also get security of tenure, which is the first time we've ever had that in this state. So the first time you will see any resetting will actually be 2032.
OK, but there was a little bit of confusion about this. And in fairness, I think this might be because of the statement that your own department issued, which said all landlords will have the right to reset rent where the rent is below market at the end of each 6-year tenancy. So that's probably where the confusion arose. But you're saying this will only apply from 2032 on.
Yeah, so only for tenancies that are entered into from March 2026. So you roll 6 years on from there. So the first resettings won't be until 2032. It's also only for new apartments that become available, actually as a result, that are commenced from today's decision at Cabinet. Realistically, it takes 2 years to deliver apartments, so you probably won't see them for some time after that as well, in terms of new apartments.
Yeah, which means that the supply that you're looking for isn't going to be coming into play until that time as well.
Well, we need to get that supply going. It takes time to deliver apartments, but we need to act now if we're going to have them.
OK, now, the IMF and the Housing Commission criticised rent protection zones, which are now expanding to the entire country, because they said it contributes to a two-tier rental sector, keeps rents lower for existing tenants, which is what you just said, while new tenants face significantly higher rents. And this plan looks like accentuating that, because each time a renter moves to a new tenancy, the rent is going to go up.
Well, I gave a serious consideration to their recommendations, and I think what we are achieving here is a balance. I have to try and get that balance between protecting existing tenants, and we are doubling down on protection for tenants in terms of bringing in security of tenure, but also making that tweak for new apartments. And it's only new apartments where that link will be inflation only in between tenancies, or sorry, say during tenancies.
OK, but it's not just for new apartments. I have to come back to this again. Each time a new tenancy starts, the rent can go up. So, for instance, take students, OK? A lot of churn in students. A lot of them would rent for a year and then rent a new place the following year, the following academic year. So each year their rent is going to go up under this plan.
So if it's education-specific accommodation, that won't be the case. Myself, we got agreement at Cabinet as well that specific protections we put in those to protect education-specific accommodation.
Is that accommodation that's on university campuses?
Well, yes, if it's designated specifically education, that is the case.
So if a student is renting off campus or outside of university accommodation?
If a student is renting in, if you like, common private rental, it's the same as the rest of the general population, they have the same protections as everybody else.
So the rent will go up every year?
Well, if somebody leaves voluntarily, and this is a really important point as well, if a landlord serves a notice of quit, the property cannot be reset in terms of rent. If the tenant voluntarily leaves, then they can. OK. This is all about increasing supply. And you're making the argument that the existing system, people aren't prepared to invest because the rents aren't high enough. So in order to attract investment, you're going to have to allow rents to rise by quite a significant margin, aren't you? So investors aren't investing for two key reasons. One is the viability in terms of the profit that they can make. That's not what today really is about. The second reason they're not investing is because of that 2% backstop, if you like, on inflation. So current tenants, the rent can only go up year on year by inflation or 2%, whichever is the lower. That means investors, when they're looking at investing in Ireland, are saying, well, if we invest in, say, a large apartment block and building one, we can actually make a loss. And our terms, if you like, of our industry are saying, well, we can't invest in a city where we're probably going to make a loss. So removing the 2%, if you like, and only having the cap as being inflation removes, if you like, that blockage. We still have to close that yield. We're not making renters close that yield. We would never do that. We will do that through other measures will be taken by the government in the coming weeks and months to close that yield gap. So our first step was to save the planning permissions, which we did a number of weeks ago through a government decision. That's to preserve the pipeline. This is, if you like, is a prerequisite to getting investors in. Our next steps would be ensure that we close that viability gap. We then get the supply going, and that, I think, in turn will lead to a downward pressure on our rent.
OK. James Browne, Minister for Housing, thanks for joining us on 6-1.
Thank you.